Hello and welcome to another episode of Africa Update, reaching you from our studios here in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And this week on the program, we'll be taking a look at something happening on the eastern and the central part of Africa. To stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa Update. I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. Now, there's been some issues happening on the African continent generally, actually, but two major things have taken place politically, and that's the Cameroon situation, Central Africa, and the situation in Tanzania. But we'll start off with Tanzania, where we see that there's been some issues, basically the issue of the country having its internet shut down and all that happening as the country approaches its 2025 general elections that took place on the 29th and the 30th of October. The ruling party and government are being accused of mounting a crackdown on opposition and civil society. The main opposition party, Chiamaka Nwafor na Mandela Chadema for short, faces exclusion after its leader Tundu was arrested and charged with treason in April. A recent directive from the government asked private employers and civil servants to work from home amid security advisories, signaling the authorities expect possible unrest. A lot has happened. We've heard about the clampdown on social media and, shutdown of services in the country, and then the reactions that's taking place. Now let's look at this video from DW on the matter.
Condition of tembo.
Now, a lot of questions are coming up from all what's happening in Tanzania. But joining me on the program this day to further discuss this is Abdullahi Tijani. He's a public affairs analyst and an African liberty contributor. He's also a journalist, a lawyer, and a policy advocate working at the intersection of governance, media, and human rights. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the situation in Tanzania, we see what's happened. If you remember how she came into power, that's the president of Tanzania. Some person died and she came into power, and that's how it's been so far. And the country has seemingly been doing well. But now we're seeing issues, clamp down and all that. What do you make of the situation in Tanzania?
Yeah, I think when President Samia came into power in 2021, she came in as a reformist. She lifted some bans by the former president. She lifted 6-year ban on political opponent rallies. But later on, as election drew near, it's happened that she began, we started seeing political oppositions disappearing, started seeing clamp down on journalists, on media, and that's very disturbing for someone that came into power as a reformist.
Okay. Now, what are we expecting, with this? Some people are saying the elections are not free and fair, and somehow I don't even know if an election actually took place in Tanzania with the stories that we're seeing coming out of there. If we can call what happened there an election. So what are we expecting going forward with the unrest actually taking place in Tanzania?
Yeah, we could say there are elections in some areas of the countries. There are no violence in places where President Samia specifically voted, but there have been reports of violence and electoral malpractice in other places, and that have sparked reactions and demonstrations from citizens. And I mean, we saw major opposition leaders being imprisoned and being charged for treason as election junior. And also, we've seen several demonstrators being shot down. We've seen tear gas being shot at protesters. So it is unfortunate that we are seeing unrest, post-election activities. And right now, it is very, very important for the president to negotiate with people that have grievances and not use state force on them.
All right. Now, earlier on, before the elections took place, we saw and heard about internet shutdowns in the East African country of Tanzania. Now, what does that portend for freedom of speech and access to information, freedom of expression? Also, we're seeing this kind of thing happen across the African continent in different parts, be it East, be it West, be it South, North, and Central, where presidents in power are beginning to try, I think, for lack of a better word, grasp or hold on to power and then take certain decisions, like you said now, clamping down on opposition, barring them from elections. What does this portend for our democracy in Africa, of course, East Africa in scope?
I think African leaders have realized that it is for democracy to be sustainable, for voice of the people to be heard, and internet must be active. And that is the first thing they go after when they do not want the voice of the citizens to be heard. And like you mentioned, we've seen instances all across the continent, and African leaders have started using the first thing that will go when they do not want the voice of the citizens to be heard is the internet. And that is disturbing, because during elections, there is no other instrument that is as important as the internet, because people want to be sharing information across the board. People want to fact check data, fact check facts. But without internet, such a thing will not happen. So it is apparent that African leaders they are hiding something from the world. They do not want citizens to communicate among themselves. I mean, obviously, they will always be citing security reasons, and that is not something new. But we all know when something like this happens, especially post-election, we know that, the president or the government do not want the world or the citizens to know some things. And that's exactly what is happening in Tanzania.
So what are we expecting now for the government? They have to do what they have to do. They have to protect their citizens. But how are we expecting to balance security concerns with rights of citizens together, to make that something that, we're protecting the country, but we're not hurting you as well?
I think the very first thing to be addressed is to listen to the demonstrators and hear their grievances. So you cannot jail and start accusing top opposition leaders for treason as election junior, and will not see demonstrations from the supporters of this, oppositions. So the very first place the president can start with is to release all political prisoners and to stop the armed forces being leashed against the protesters. So from there, the president can sit down with the top political opponents and see how they can collaborate and move the country forward from here.
Do you think that what Samia is doing is to consolidate her party's dominance in the country, or she's consolidating her dominance in the country? Because it could be two different things. I want my party to still be in position, therefore I could step down in a few years' time, the next election, and when I know that they're in power, someone else can come up. But if it's about her, are we going to see a case whereby we're moving to an authoritarian democracy? Because that's what it's looking like now in the African continent for Tanzania.
Yeah, I think it's very much of the two. Why we may want to distinguish it, I think it's the same thing, because Samia's party has been ruling the country since the independence, and I do not think the party is willing to leave power. And Samia herself has proven time without number that she is willing to stay in power with her actions by clamping down on media and arresting and charging top opponents for political treason. So she literally chose whom to go against during the election. So by barring top opponents. So we can see that she's very intentional, and we can also say the party is not willing to relinquish its power to another party.
Now, of course, as all elections go on the African continent mostly, international observers come and look. What do we expect from them? What role will they play? And what will their assessment, the impact of it, be on Tanzania globally?
So the international organizations and observers need to serve as an oversight institution to force the government to make police and other security forces accountable to the people. So because there is accountability in theory in the country, I mean, just like any other country, but then it's almost impossible or very difficult for us to see the situation where governments will hold the security forces accountable. And that's exactly what international observers should be doing. They need to make sure the governments and the security forces are accountable to the people and stop clamping down on the rights of the citizens.
All right. That's it on Tanzania. Let's go over to what's happening in Cameroon. And as we all know, Biya has been re-elected again. And he's now the president or re-elected president of the Cameroon country. He's aged 92 and has been in power since 1982. He was officially declared the winner of the October 12, 2025 presidential election with about 53.66% of the vote. However, there's been some violence in that regard. Let's look at this report from DW.
Young men blocking roads and setting fires. A visible display of anger in Douala after Paul Biya, Cameroon's longtime leader, was declared the victor in a highly controversial election.
The Cameroonian people, who had long been afraid, found themselves saying, "This is too much," which is why, everywhere, young people who voted overwhelmingly for change find themselves forced to start a revolution. And that's kind of what I see when I look at the cities that are deserted on weekdays. It wasn't a good idea for those in power, even after 43 years, to still try to believe that they can get away with it.
Supporters of opposition leader Issa Chiruma say the election was rigged, with protesters taking to the streets before the result to denounce what they describe as electoral fraud. Tear gas hanging in the air as police try to disperse the crowds. Tensions that have lingered in the days since the vote.
We are simply asking the army to withdraw and stand behind us, because the strength of Cameroon is us, the young people. It's the people who elect the president.
Now aged 92, Paul Biya has ruled Cameroon since 1982, becoming extremely unpopular over the decades in this Central African country. Many blaming him for the problems the country now faces as people look to the polls. For years, Cameroon has been seen as a stable country in an unstable region. But now, analysts believe if this political tension continue, it could drag the country to difficult days ahead, if not properly managed. Dozens of people have been arrested in connection to the protest, and close to 10 people have been killed. The African Union and the European Union have all raised concerns over the escalating violence. Issa Chiruma, Biya's main challenger, and his supporters say they will not accept the results of the election. The government has promised to arrest and prosecute him. More fuel to the fires burning in Cameroon that could lead to further instability across the country.
Now, some of the key issues in Cameroon is that this election took place in the midst of the problems happening with the Anglophone and the Francophone parts of the region of the country. Actually, if you are aware of what's happening in Cameroon, there's been some underlying conflict in certain parts of Cameroon between certain groups of people. Of course, economic stagnation, youth unemployment, and rising cost of living. And the credibility of this election has equally been brought to bear. We're asking, was it really, really important? A few times on the program a few weeks ago, we talked about how the ELICAM was setting up a committee to now go and find out who won the elections. Still with me to continue this conversation is Abdullahi Tijani. Now, Cameroon, we're seeing another issue there now. He's been in power, and this is 43 years actually of him being in power. That's Paul Biya in Cameroon. It's supposed to be a democracy, but it seems like like I always like to call it, a monarchical democracy, whereby people just stay in power, they die, hand over to the children and all that. Were we expecting something different to happen in Cameroon?
I do not think we'll be expecting anything different, because if somebody rules the country for 43 years and there has not been any difference, so what difference, I mean, should we be expecting in the next 7 years? So he has been in power, like you said, since 1982, and most youths in the country, most citizens, more than 60% of the citizens grew up knowing just one leader, and the country has not changed. So I do not think we'll be expecting anything different in the country in the next 7 years.
All right, now, do you think it was a wise decision to have had this election, seen as the situation in Cameroon with the issues with the Anglophone and Francophone parts of the country happening?
To have an election is not the problem, but the consequence or the aftermath of the elections. So if we had free and fair elections and credible elections, I think it would be a good sign, and we act positively for the Amazonia. But if we have an election that is rigged, I mean, popularly not accepted, it will be another point, another something to hold for the separatists and say, okay, look, we are no longer interested in this country. We are no longer interested in this leader as the election is being rigged. And the leader being pronounced the winner is not the choice of the populace. So that might not act well, but to have election, to have, regular election is part of something that will hold the country together. But I cannot say the same for a rigged and an election that lacks credibility.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you believe that the elections in Cameroon lacked credibility, wasn't free and fair?
Yeah, we have seen the opposition leaders coming out to, publicly rejected the outcome of the election, and we've seen protesters on the streets complaining and lamenting the outcome of the election, and we've seen the security forces coming down on these demonstrators. So that is a red flag to say, and we've also seen the government trying to silence the opposition by bringing up treasonable charges against the opposition. So, we've seen several signs to say, okay, this election was marred with violence and electoral malpractices. So, it lacks credibility.
All right, now, what does this mean for Cameroon's democratic future, this situation that has happened now with Paul Biya continuing? Is this a thing of continuity or deeper authoritarianism?
It is a continuity from an authoritarian regime that wants to, or that portrays itself as, a democrat, because if, a true democrat who's been on the power for 43 years, more than some monarchs, is definitely an authoritarian. And it is much less than a continuity. But then it is a good thing that the country still holds election every every here and there, every 7 years. But we need real change, which is we need an election that is credible. The country needs to bring back presidential term limits, which was removed by President Biya. The country needs a new constitutional reforms to put term limits on the number of time a president can contest, and also the youth need to see new leaders and know what true leadership really means.
All right, now you said earlier that we shouldn't expect any change from Paul Biya since he's been there for 43 years. But, is it possible that maybe somehow this time around something different would happen? And if it is possible, what policy shifts should we hope that Biya's current new government would put in place? Decentralization and governance.
Yeah, we can expect many promises from the leaders. We can expect promises. The government has promised local councils inclusivity. But then this is not a new thing in the country. There has been promises of local council inclusivity since 2018. And but that's reform has only been in theory, but not in practice. So yeah, the government has been promising this, but then we need real change, not just promises that we've been having over the past 8 years or 7 years.
All right. So now I'm going to ask you a question that should cut across both stories, both for Tanzania and for Cameroon. This situation is taking place now in these countries, East Africa, Central Africa. What would that do for investor confidence in these nations? If you're an investor, would you want to go put in your funds in this country at this time?
Investors like trust, they like stability, and they like rule of law. They like a country or an area where they can always challenge any wrongdoings. And what is happening in the country, the instability, demonstrations, the climb down on media and on dissent is not a good thing for an investment. And there is no better time for these countries to look outwards and attract foreign FDI, foreign direct investments than now. So the country needs to take it seriously. It needs to reverse all the activities that climb down on rule of law and that climb down on the dissent, so as to attract investors. So if I'm an investor, I don't want to go to a country where there is instability and uncertainty. So investors need or like stability, and that is what these countries lack at the moment, and that is very, very deterrent.
All right. Thank you so much, Abdullahi Tijani, for sharing your insights with us on the situations in Cameroon and Tanzania. Talking about democracy on trial, what's happening there.
Thanks so much for having me.
When we return from the break, we'll take a look at the situation in Sudan. Just stay with us. We'll be right back. Let's take a look at this story put together on the situation in Sudan.
More than 30,000 people have fled the southwestern Sudanese city of Al Fasher since the RSF seized control on Sunday. Its capture followed an 18-month siege marked by bombardments and starvation. Now, less than 20% of the city's pre-war population remains. The rest have been displaced or killed. They're escaping scenes like these, and worse. Posted on social media, some videos show paramilitary forces firing into the air. Others, too gruesome to be seen here, show corpses piled up in mass graves. The UN condemned the atrocities against civilians and vital infrastructure.
Today, we were horrified by reports of the tragic killings of more than 460 people, both patients and their companions, at the Saudi maternity hospital in El Fasher. This follows recent attacks and the abduction of health. Stress enough that civilians, humanitarian workers, medical personnel must always be protected.
The RSF head acknowledged the violations. He said a committee was investigating and vowed accountability for those responsible. But he said the capture of Al Fasher was a turning point.
The liberation of El Fasher is an opportunity for Sudanese unity. And we say Sudanese unity through peace or through war.
But with two parallel governments and millions displaced. Contrary to the general's claim of unity, Al Fasher means Sudan has now been effectively divided in two.
At this camp for displaced people in Sudan, women have been describing their harrowing experiences as they fled the city of Al Fasher. The North
Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces say they've arrested fighters accused of rights violations in the recently captured city of Al Fasher. Video made available by the group showed a fighter identified as Abu Lulu being put behind bars. Abu Lulu had been seen in TikTok videos committing summary executions. This unnamed RSF officer said Abdullahi was detained in accordance with the instructions of RSF Commander General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. He said the arrest was carried out in an atmosphere of discipline and professionalism without any obstacles. When the RSF took control of North Darfur's besieged capital on Sunday, eyewitnesses described a rampage, with fighters carrying out hundreds of ethnically targeted killings. Al-Fasher was under siege for more than 500 days as the RSF battled Sudanese armed forces for control of the army's last stronghold in the region. The fall of the city has raised fears that Africa's third largest country may split, with the RSF holding Darfur and the military holding the capital, Khartoum.
Well, hopefully that situation is resolved. Rapid support forces and what's happening in Sudan is resolved fast and easy so the country can forge ahead and move forward. And that's too much for you on the program today. We've been discussing the situation in Tanzania, Cameroon, and we had a look at the theme taking place, or rather the situation on ground in Sudan. My name is Chiamaka Nwafor. Same time, same place next week. Bye for now.